My brother borrowed my 16-year-old son's brand new car. He crashed it into a tree and then called the cops on the child. Our parents lied to the police to protect my golden brother. I stayed silent and did this. 3 days later, their faces went pale when the call came at 2 in the morning. I fumbled for my phone, heart already racing because nothing good happens at that hour. Unknown number. My thumb hesitated over the decline button, then something made me answer. Is this Mr. Carson? James Carson? Speaking. This is Officer Rodriguez with the state police. We have your son Ethan here at the station. There's been an accident involving a vehicle registered to your address. My stomach dropped. Ethan had only gotten his license 3 weeks ago. The car was barely broken in, a Honda Civic we'd saved for years to buy him. Safe, reliable, nothing flashy. We'd made him promise to drive carefully, to follow every rule, to never take unnecessary risks. Is he hurt? My wife Sarah sat up beside me, clutching my arm. He's physically fine, but there are some serious charges being discussed. You should come down right away. The drive to the station felt endless. Sarah kept asking questions I couldn't answer. When we arrived, a different officer led us to a small room where Ethan sat hunched over a table, his face blotchy and red. He looked up when we entered, and the relief in his eyes was immediate. Dad, I swear I didn't do anything wrong. Uncle Kyle took the car. I told him no, but he just grabbed the keys and left. My brother Kyle. Of course. Officer Rodriguez entered behind us, carrying a clipboard. Mr. Carson, your son is claiming he wasn't driving the vehicle at the time of the accident. However, we have conflicting statements from witnesses at the scene. What witnesses? Your parents arrived shortly after the accident occurred. They both stated that Ethan was behind the wheel when the vehicle struck a tree on Maple Street. Your brother Kyle corroborated this account. The room tilted slightly. My parents and Kyle were there? They all gave statements. Rodriguez flipped through his notes. According to them, Ethan was driving recklessly, possibly under the influence. Your brother attempted to stop him but couldn't prevent the accident. I looked at Ethan. Tears streamed down his face now. Dad, I was asleep. Mom can tell you. I went to bed at 10:30. Uncle Kyle showed up around midnight asking to borrow my car because his truck wouldn't start. I said no, but he knew where I keep my keys in the kitchen. I heard the car start and ran outside, but he was already gone. Sarah's hand found mine under the table. Officer, our son is telling the truth. He was home all night. I can verify this. Rodriguez's expression remained neutral. With respect, ma'am, you're his mother. The other witnesses have no apparent reason to lie. Your son's uncle actually called 911 immediately after the accident. He seemed quite concerned about Ethan's welfare. The trap was perfect. Kyle had crashed the car, panicked, and decided to pin it on Ethan. Then he'd called our parents, who'd rushed to the scene and backed his story without hesitation. The golden child could do no wrong, even at 16-year-old Ethan's expense. I want to speak with my brother and my parents, I said quietly. Rodriguez shook his head. They've already left. Gave their statements and went home. We're holding Ethan for now pending further investigation. Given the severity of the accident and the allegations of reckless driving, we're considering charging him as an adult. He's 16 years old, Sarah said, her voice breaking. Old enough to drive. Old enough to face the consequences. Rodriguez stood. You should consider getting a lawyer. They let us take Ethan home an hour later with a court date scheduled for 3 weeks out. The entire drive back, he kept apologizing, kept insisting he'd done nothing wrong. We believed him completely. Kyle had a history of exactly this kind of behavior, though never anything quite so brazen. I dropped Sarah and Ethan at home and drove straight to my parents' house. It was nearly 5 in the morning, but every light was on. Mom answered the door in her bathrobe, her face carefully composed. James. We were expecting you. Dad sat at the kitchen table with Kyle. My brother looked terrible, scratches on his face and a bandage on his forehead. He had the grace to look away when I entered. Tell me what happened, I said, keeping my voice level. Your son crashed his car, Dad said flatly. Kyle tried to stop him, but Ethan was out of control. Ethan was asleep in his bed. I want to hear it from Kyle. My brother finally met my eyes. Look, I know you're upset, but Ethan's been acting out lately. You've been too lenient with him. Tonight he took the car without permission. Stop lying. The words came out harder than I intended. You took his car. You crashed it. And now you're trying to destroy his life to save yourself. Mom stepped between us. James, you need to calm down. We all gave statements to the police. The matter is settled. Settled? They're talking about charging him as an adult. Do you understand what that means? He could face jail time, lose his license before he's even had it a month, have a criminal record that follows him forever. Then he should have thought about that before driving recklessly, Dad said. The casual cruelty of it knocked the wind out of me. These were the same parents who'd bailed Kyle out of 3 DUIs, who'd paid his legal fees when he'd been caught writing bad checks, who'd given him money every time one of his schemes fell apart. But Ethan, their grandson, their first grandchild, they'd throw under the bus without a second thought. Kyle is 34 years old, I said slowly. Ethan is 16. And you're choosing to protect Kyle by destroying your grandson's future. We're not destroying anything, Mom said. We're telling the truth as we saw it. You're lying to the police. That's a crime. Kyle stood up. Nobody's lying, James. Maybe you just don't want to accept that your perfect son messed up. I looked at each of them in turn. 3 people I'd loved my entire life, standing united against me and my child. The betrayal was so complete, so absolute, that I couldn't find words to describe it. You have one chance to fix this, I said. Go back to the police. Tell them you made a mistake. Kyle was driving. We can't do that, Dad said. We already gave our statements. Then we're done here. I left before anyone could respond. The drive home passed in a blur. Sarah was waiting up, and I told her everything. She sat in silence for a long moment, then asked the question I'd been avoiding. What are we going to do? I don't know yet. But I'm not letting them destroy Ethan. The next morning, I called a lawyer named Patricia Hendricks who'd been recommended by a colleague. She listened to the situation, asked pointed questions, and didn't sugarcoat the response. This is going to be difficult. 3 adult witnesses gave statements placing Ethan behind the wheel. Without physical evidence to contradict them, it's basically their word against his. And he's a 16-year-old kid with a brand new license. What about the timeline? Ethan was home all night. Your wife can testify to that, but prosecutors will argue she's biased. Do you have any way to prove he was home? Security cameras, phone records, anything? We didn't. Our neighborhood was quiet, safe. We'd never felt the need for cameras. Ethan's phone had been in his room all night, which actually worked against us because it couldn't provide location data showing he'd never left the house. What are our options? Sarah asked. Patricia tapped her pen against her notepad. We fight it. I'll need to depose your brother and parents, see if their stories hold up under scrutiny. Accident scenes leave evidence. The position of the driver's seat, the angle of impact, injury patterns. We might be able to demonstrate that someone larger than Ethan was actually driving. Kyle is 6'2". Ethan is 5'9". That could work in our favor. I'll get the police report and vehicle inspection records. In the meantime, Ethan needs to stay out of trouble. No social media posts about this, no discussing the case with anyone except us. Over the next few days, I did research. The accident scene was on Maple Street, about 8 miles from our house. According to the police report Patricia obtained, the car had struck a tree at approximately 1:47 a.m. Kyle's 911 call came in at 1:51 a.m. My parents arrived at 2:03 a.m., somehow making a 20-minute drive in 16 minutes. I also pulled Kyle's phone records, which were accessible because he was still on our family cell plan. Something I'd been meaning to remove him from but kept putting off. Those records showed he'd called Dad at 1:52 a.m., right after calling 911. Dad had then called Mom. They'd coordinated their response in real time. But the most interesting detail came from the vehicle inspection report. The driver's seat had been positioned far back, consistent with someone of Kyle's height rather than Ethan's. The police had noted this discrepancy but dismissed it because Ethan might have adjusted the seat while driving. Except Ethan was meticulous about the car. He'd adjusted everything perfectly the day we bought it and hadn't changed it since. Patricia filed a motion to suppress my family's testimony based on bias and inconsistencies. The prosecutor fought back hard, arguing that their statements were credible and corroborated each other. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following week. During this time, I didn't speak to my parents or Kyle. They tried calling, leaving messages that ranged from concern to accusatory. Mom wanted to know why I was making this so difficult. Dad thought I should accept reality and help Ethan learn from his mistakes. Kyle sent a text saying he was sorry it had come to this, but he had to tell the truth. The lies were so effortless for them, so complete, that I started to question everything I knew about my family. How many times had they lied before? How many times had Kyle's problems been blamed on someone else, some circumstance, some convenient scapegoat? Sarah suggested we attend family therapy. I told her there was no family left to save. The preliminary hearing arrived. Patricia had done extraordinary work, building a timeline that exposed the holes in my family story. She had the vehicle inspection report, expert testimony about seat positioning, phone records showing the suspicious timing of calls. She'd even found a witness who'd seen Kyle leaving a bar 3 blocks from the accident scene at 1:30 a.m., clearly intoxicated. Kyle, Mom, and Dad sat on the other side of the courtroom. They dressed well, looked respectable, played their parts perfectly. When called to testify, they stuck to their script. Ethan had been driving. They'd tried to stop him. It was tragic, But the truth had to be told. Patricia cross-examined them methodically. She asked about the seat position. Kyle claimed Ethan must have moved it. She asked about the bar witness. Kyle said it must have been someone else. She asked about the phone records, the impossibly fast arrival time, the coordination of their statements. We were concerned about our grandson, Mom said, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. We rushed to the scene as fast as we could. The judge, a stern woman named Hartley, listened to everything with an unreadable expression. When Patricia finished presenting our case, she called for a recess. We waited in the hallway for 2 hours. When we reconvened, Judge Hartley looked directly at Ethan. "Young man, do you swear you were not driving the vehicle that night?" "I swear," Ethan said, his voice clear and steady. "I was home in bed. My uncle took my car without permission." Hartley turned to the prosecutor. "I'm troubled by several aspects of this case. The physical evidence contradicts the witness testimony in significant ways. The timeline is questionable. And the witnesses have an established pattern of protecting the defendant's uncle from legal consequences." My heart started pounding. "However," Hartley continued, "I cannot dismiss the charges based solely on these concerns. The case will proceed to trial. I'm releasing the defendant on his own recognizance with the condition that he surrender his driver's license pending the outcome. It wasn't the victory we needed, but it wasn't the disaster it could have been. Ethan would face trial, but at least he wasn't being held. Patricia assured us we had a strong case, but trials were unpredictable. Juries could go either way." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my family, about the casual way they'd decided to sacrifice Ethan. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Not hot anger, but cold and calculating. They'd made a choice. Now I would make mine. I spent the next week gathering information. Kyle worked sporadically as a contractor, mostly under the table to avoid paying child support from his first marriage. He lived in a rental house Dad owned, paid no rent, and had defaulted on every financial obligation he'd ever had. Our parents had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars cleaning up his messes over the years. They'd refinanced their house twice to cover his debts. Mom's retirement account had been depleted paying for his legal troubles. Dad had taken out a personal loan to fund Kyle's last failed business venture, a landscaping company that lasted exactly 4 months before folding. I documented everything. Bank statements, loan documents, property records. Some of it I had access to because I'd been listed as a co-signer or beneficiary on various accounts over the years. Other information came from public records. By the end of the week, I had a complete financial picture of my family's dysfunction. Then I made some calls. The IRS was very interested to learn about Kyle's unreported income. I provided documentation of cash payments he'd received for contracting work, none of which had been reported on his tax returns. I also mentioned the rental arrangement with Dad, which constituted unreported rental income. The State Bar Association wanted to know about Mom's former career as a paralegal. She'd left the profession under murky circumstances, something about missing client funds. The statute of limitations had expired on any criminal charges, but the bar could still investigate. With the right push, they might reopen the case. Dad's contracting business had always cut corners. Building code violations, unpermitted work, safety violations. I'd looked the other way for years, but now I compiled a comprehensive file and sent it to every relevant regulatory agency I could find. I also reached out to Kyle's ex-wife, Jennifer. She'd been trying to collect child support for 8 years with minimal success. I provided her with documentation of Kyle's income and assets, including the rent-free house he lived in. With this information, she could finally force him to pay what he owed. None of this was revenge in the traditional sense. I wasn't fabricating evidence or making false accusations. I was simply ensuring that the truth caught up with people who'd spent years dodging it. Every document I submitted was factual, every claim was supported, every regulatory complaint was legitimate. 3 days after the preliminary hearing, I got a call from Dad. "James, we need to talk. Something's happened." "I'm busy." The IRS contacted us. They're auditing Kyle and reviewing our tax returns. They're asking about the rental property and some kind of unreported income. That's unfortunate. "Did you do this?" I let the silence stretch out. "Do what?" "Don't play games. Did you report Kyle to the IRS?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "James, please. We can fix this. We can tell the police the truth about the accident. Just make this stop." "I can't make anything stop, Dad. I'm not a federal agent. If the IRS is investigating you, that's between you and them. We also got a notice about building code violations. The Bar Association called your mother. Kyle's ex-wife has filed for full custody and back child support. This is all happening at once. It's not a coincidence. Sounds like you have a lot to deal with. This is blackmail. Blackmail implies I'm asking for something in exchange. I'm not asking for anything. I'm just letting consequences happen." Dad's voice dropped to a whisper. "We'll lose everything." Ethan could lose everything too. His future, his freedom, his entire life. You were willing to let that happen to protect Kyle. Now you're upset that there might be consequences for your choices? He's our son. Ethan is your grandson. He's a child. Kyle is a grown man who's been running from responsibility his entire life. You enabled him, you protected him, and now you're surprised that someone finally held him accountable? What do you want us to do? Finally. The question I'd been waiting for. I want you to tell the truth. Go to the police, recant your statements, and admit Kyle was driving. Do it today. Kyle will be arrested. Yes, he will. And he'll face consequences for his actions, which is something he should have done decades ago. James, those are my terms. Tell the truth, or deal with the consequences of your lies. I'm not negotiating. I hung up before he could respond. 2 hours later, Patricia called. The prosecutor just contacted me. Your family has requested a meeting to change their testimony. They want immunity from perjury charges. Tell them no immunity. If they want to change their story, they do it without protection. That's risky. If they face charges themselves, they might decide not to cooperate. They'll cooperate. Trust me. Patricia was quiet for a moment. What did you do? I made sure the truth became more valuable than their lies. Update 1. The meeting with the prosecutor happened the next morning. Mom, Dad, and Kyle sat in the district attorney's office looking like they'd aged 10 years and 3 days. I insisted on being present with Patricia, and after some negotiation, the DA agreed. Kyle spoke first, reading from a prepared statement that Patricia suspected had been written by a lawyer they'd hired. His voice was flat, mechanical. On the night of the accident, I took my nephew's vehicle without permission. I had been drinking and should not have been driving. I lost control and struck a tree on Maple Street. In a moment of panic, I made a terrible decision. I called my parents and asked them to say that Ethan had been driving. They agreed to protect me, and we all lied to the police. I deeply regret this decision and take full responsibility for my actions. The DA, a sharp-eyed man named Marcus Webb, turned to my parents. And you both corroborated this false story? Dad nodded stiffly. We did. We thought we were protecting our son, but we see now that we made a terrible mistake. We're prepared to provide accurate testimony going forward. Webb leaned back in his chair. You understand you've confessed to filing false police reports, obstruction of justice, and perjury? These are serious crimes. We understand, Mom said quietly. We're willing to accept whatever consequences are appropriate. We just want to make this right for our grandson. Patricia jumped in before Webb could respond. My client, Ethan Carson, has been subjected to significant emotional distress and reputational harm as a result of these false accusations. His family is prepared to pursue civil remedies in addition to seeking dismissal of the criminal charges. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Webb said. First, I need to determine what charges to file against these three. I'd like to request that any charges against my parents be handled with discretion, I said, the words tasting bitter. They made a terrible choice, but they're trying to correct it now. Kyle, on the other hand, was the initial wrongdoer and the architect of this deception. Kyle's head snapped up. You're throwing me under the bus? You threw Ethan under the bus. I'm just making sure you ride it alone. Webb considered this. I appreciate the family dynamics at play here, but I can't simply ignore criminal behavior. That said, I'm willing to differentiate between the instigator and the accomplices. He looked at Kyle. You'll be charged with DUI, reckless driving, filing a false police report, and obstruction of justice. Given your history, I'll be recommending jail time. Kyle's face went pale, but he said nothing. As for you two, Webb turned to my parents, I'll charge you with filing false police reports. First-time offense, I'll recommend probation and community service. But understand this isn't mercy. It's acknowledgement that you're trying to rectify your mistake. What about the charges against Ethan? Patricia asked. Dismissed with prejudice. The case is closed. The relief was so overwhelming I had to grip the armrest of my chair. Ethan was free. The nightmare was over. But Kyle wasn't done. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is garbage. You destroyed our entire lives over a car accident. The IRS is crawling through everything we own. Dad's business is being investigated. Mom could lose her credentials. My ex-wife is taking me to court. All because you couldn't just let it go. Let it go? The words came out sharper than I intended. You tried to send my son to jail for a crime you committed. You were willing to ruin a 16-year-old's life to avoid taking responsibility for yours. He would have gotten probation, maybe some community service. He's a kid. They go easy on kids. You don't know that. And even if they had, he'd have a criminal record. He'd lose opportunities, face judgment, carry that burden for years. All because you couldn't be bothered to face the consequences of your own actions. I'm your brother. And Ethan is your nephew. That didn't stop you. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom stared at her hands. Dad looked anywhere but at me. Kyle stood frozen, realizing perhaps for the first time that he'd burned the last bridge. "We're done here," I said, standing. "Patricia will be in touch about the civil suit. We'll be seeking compensation for legal fees, emotional distress, and the totaled vehicle." As we left the DA's office, Mom tried to follow. "James, please. We need to talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about. You made your choices. We're still your parents. We made a mistake, but we're trying to fix it." I turned to face her. "You made a mistake when you believed Kyle over Ethan without question. You compounded it when you lied to the police. You turned it into something unforgivable when you maintained those lies even after seeing what it was doing to him. The only reason you're fixing it now is because you're facing consequences. That's not remorse. That's self-preservation. That's not fair," Dad interjected. "We love Ethan. Love is a choice expressed through actions. Your actions chose Kyle over Ethan. Your actions were willing to sacrifice your grandson to protect your grown son from his own mistakes. You don't get to claim love while demonstrating the opposite." Patricia touched my arm gently. "James, we should go." I let her guide me away, leaving my parents standing in the hallway looking lost and bewildered. The satisfaction I'd expected to feel was absent. Instead, there was just emptiness where my family used to be. The drive home was quiet. Patricia broke the silence halfway there. "What happens now?" "Kyle goes to jail. My parents get probation. We sue for damages and rebuild what they tried to destroy." "I meant with your family. Are you planning to reconcile?" The question sat heavy between us. I don't know. Part of me wants to believe they've learned something from this. But another part knows they only changed their story because continuing to lie became more expensive than telling the truth. That's not growth. That's just calculation. "People can surprise you," Patricia said. "Sometimes crisis forces real change." Maybe. But Ethan is my priority. Whatever happens with my parents and Kyle has to be secondary to protecting him. When I got home, Sarah and Ethan were waiting in the living room. The moment I walked in, they both stood, faces tight with anxiety. "The charges are dismissed," I said. "It's over." Ethan's legs gave out. He sat down hard on the couch, his face crumpling as the stress of the last 2 weeks finally broke through. Sarah wrapped her arms around him, and they both cried while I stood there feeling utterly wrung out. After a few minutes, Ethan looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "What about Uncle Kyle and Grandma and Grandpa?" I sat down and told them everything. The meeting with the DA, the charges being filed, the admissions of guilt. Ethan listened in silence, his expression cycling through relief, anger, and something that looked like grief. "Why did they do it?" he asked finally. "Why did they lie?" "Because they've spent your uncle's entire life protecting him from consequences." It became a reflex. They didn't think about what it would cost you. They only thought about saving Kyle. "Do you think they're sorry?" "I think they're sorry they got caught. I don't know if they're sorry for what they did." Sarah squeezed Ethan's hand. "The important thing is that you're safe now. The truth came out. Because Dad made it come out." Ethan looked at me. "You did something, didn't you? Something that made them change their minds." I thought about lying, about protecting him from the methods I'd used. But Ethan was almost an adult now. He'd been through something that would have broken many people. He deserved the truth. "Yes. I made sure they faced consequences for their other bad choices. I reported things they'd been getting away with for years. When they realized the cost of maintaining their lies, they decided telling the truth was easier." "Is that wrong? What you did?" "I don't know. I didn't lie or break any laws. I just made sure the truth caught up with them. You can decide for yourself whether that was right or wrong." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "I'm glad you did it. They would have let me go to jail." The simplicity of that statement, the clarity of it, struck something deep. This was what it came down to. Family should protect family. When that fundamental principle was violated, when people chose favoritism over fairness, everything else became secondary. Over the next few weeks, we settled into a new normal. Patricia filed a civil suit against Kyle for the totaled vehicle and our legal expenses. His insurance had lapsed, so any judgment would come directly from him, which meant we'd probably never see the money. But it was the principle that mattered. Kyle was sentenced to 18 months in county jail, with the possibility of early release after a year. He'd also lost his driver's license for 5 years and would face years of probation after his release. The judge had been unimpressed by his history and his attempt to frame a minor for his crimes. My parents received probation, community service, and significant fines. Dad's contracting business was suspended pending investigation into multiple code violations. Mom was cleared by the Bar Association after they determined the original complaint against her had been improperly filed, though the stress of the investigation had taken a visible toll. They tried to reach out several times. Letters, phone calls, showing up at the house unannounced. I refused all contact. Sarah thought I was being too harsh, that eventually I'd need to forgive them. Maybe she was right. But that eventually wasn't now. Ethan handled everything with a maturity that impressed me. He returned to school, dealt with questions from friends and teachers, and slowly rebuilt his confidence. We replaced his car with a used sedan, nothing fancy, but he treated it like it was precious. One evening about 6 weeks after the charges were dismissed, he found me in my office reviewing some work documents. "Dad? Can we talk?" "Always." He sat down across from me, fidgeting with the edge of his shirt. "I've been thinking about what happened. About Uncle Kyle and Grandma and Grandpa." "Okay." "I'm angry at them. Really angry. But I'm also kind of sad. I used to think they were good people who just had problems sometimes. Now I don't know what to think." "That's normal. They were good to you before this happened. Were they, though? Or were they just good when it didn't cost them anything?" He looked at me directly. "If Uncle Kyle had crashed his own car, they would have helped him. If I'd actually been the one driving and crashed, would they have protected me the same way?" The question was painfully insightful. "I don't know. I'd like to think they would, but this situation suggests otherwise." That's what I thought. Which means everything I believed about them was kind of built on the idea that they'd never have to choose. The moment they had to pick between me and Uncle Kyle, they picked him without even hesitating. People show you who they are in crisis. Your grandparents showed you where their loyalties lie. And you showed me where yours lie. Ethan's voice cracked slightly. "You could have just accepted what they said. You could have tried to make a deal or find a compromise. Instead, you fought for me even when it meant going against your whole family. You're my son. There was never a question, I know. And I want you to know that I see that. I see what you sacrificed to protect me." I thought about correcting him, about saying I hadn't sacrificed anything worth keeping. But that wasn't entirely true. I'd sacrificed the illusion of family unity, the comfort of shared history, the ease of unconditional relationships. Those things had value, even if they were built on unstable foundations. "I'd do it again," I said simply. "Every time." Ethan nodded and stood to leave. At the doorway, he paused. "Do you think you'll ever talk to them again? Grandma and Grandpa, I mean." "Maybe someday. When I'm sure they understand what they did and why it was wrong. When I'm sure they wouldn't make the same choice again." "And Uncle Kyle?" "No. Some bridges burned completely." After he left, I sat in the quiet office thinking about family, loyalty, and the choices we make when everything is on the line. My parents had chosen comfort over justice, familiarity over fairness. They'd gambled that I would accept their decision, that blood would be thicker than truth. They'd lost that gamble. Update 2. 3 months passed before I heard from my parents again. This time it wasn't a phone call or a letter. It was a knock on the door on a Saturday afternoon. Dad stood on the porch alone, looking older than I remembered. His contracting business had folded entirely during the investigation. He'd been forced to sell equipment, settle claims, and close accounts. The house he'd refinanced twice was in foreclosure proceedings. "Can we talk?" he asked. I should have said no. Should have closed the door and walked away. But something in his posture, a defeat I'd never seen before, made me step aside and let him in. We sat in the living room. Sarah had taken Ethan to a friend's house, so we were alone. Dad looked around like he was cataloging memories, seeing the space with new eyes. "Your mother wanted to come," he said. "I told her this needed to be just me and you." "Why are you here?" "To apologize. Not to ask for forgiveness or try to rebuild anything. Just to apologize." I waited. "I spent your brother's entire life making excuses for him. Every time he got in trouble, I found a way to blame circumstances, other people, bad luck. I told myself I was being a good father, that supporting your child meant protecting them from consequences." He paused, rubbing his hands together. "I was wrong. I created a man who can't function in the world because he's never had to. And when the biggest test came, when I had to choose between protecting him and protecting your son, I made the wrong choice again. Not because I don't love Ethan, but because protecting Kyle had become so automatic I didn't even question it." "You didn't just protect Kyle. You actively tried to harm Ethan to do it." "I know. I told myself we were just bending the truth, that kids are resilient, that it would all work out. I didn't let myself think about what a criminal record would mean for him. I didn't want to think about it because thinking about it would have meant admitting what we were really doing. Which was sacrificing an innocent child to save a guilty adult. Prioritizing convenience over justice. Being cowards." The word came out harsh, self-directed. "I've had a lot of time to think since everything fell apart. The business is gone. The house is gone. Your mother and I are moving into a small apartment. Kyle is in jail. And you and Ethan won't speak to us. Those are consequences. Natural results of your choices. I know. I'm not asking you to feel sorry for us. We earned all of this." He looked directly at me for the first time. "But I need you to know that I understand what we did. I understand that it was unforgivable. And I understand that if I'd succeeded in protecting Kyle, Ethan would be the one paying the price right now. The admission hung in the air between us. This was different from the forced confession in the DA's office. This was unprompted, uncoerced, just a father acknowledging the full weight of his failures. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Nothing. I know I can't fix this. I know saying sorry doesn't undo the damage. I just needed you to hear it from me, in private, without any ulterior motives. You were right about everything. The way we enabled Kyle, the pattern of lies and excuses, all of it. You were right, and I was wrong. And Mom? She understands too. It's been harder for her because she's your mother and she wants desperately to fix this. But she knows that's not possible. She knows we broke something that can't be repaired with apologies." We sat in silence for a while. Part of me wanted to rage at him, to catalog every mistake, every time they'd chosen Kyle over common sense. But what would be the point? He clearly understood. The consequences had taught him what my words never could. "How is Kyle handling jail?" I asked finally. Dad's expression darkened. "Not well. He's angry at everyone, especially you. He still thinks this was all an overreaction, that you went too far. He doesn't understand that actions have consequences." "Will he ever?" "I don't know. I hope so. But I'm not going to enable him anymore. When he gets out, he'll have to figure life out on his own. Your mother and I can't keep rescuing him." "That must be difficult." "It's necessary. We created this situation by never letting him fail." Time we stopped. Dad stood to leave. At the door, he turned back. "I don't expect you to forgive us. I don't expect you to ever want a relationship with us again. But I hope someday Ethan knows that his grandfather understands what he did wrong. I hope he knows that we see him, we value him, and we're sorry we failed him so completely." After he left, I sat alone with my thoughts for a long time. The apology had been genuine, the understanding real. But was it enough? Could it ever be enough? That evening, I told Sarah and Ethan about the conversation. Ethan listened carefully, his face unreadable. "Do you believe him?" he asked. "I think he believes what he said. Whether he's truly changed or just been beaten down by consequences, I can't say yet." "Do you want to forgive them?" The question was more complicated than it seemed. Part of me does. They're my parents. I have 40 years of memories with them. But another part of me remembers how easily they were willing to sacrifice you, and that part isn't ready to forget. What if they've actually learned something? What if they're different now? Then maybe eventually we'll find out. But that's a process that takes years, not months. Real change is proven through consistent action over time, not one good apology. Sarah interjected gently. "What do you think, Ethan? They're your grandparents too." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "I think I'm still too angry to decide. Maybe that will change. Maybe it won't. But I don't want to forgive them just because it would make things easier. If we ever have a relationship again, I want it to be real, not just everyone pretending the bad stuff didn't happen." His wisdom, his clarity, struck me again. Somewhere in the chaos of the last few months, my son had grown into someone remarkable. Life continued. We established new routines, built new traditions, created a family unit that was smaller but stronger. My parents sent occasional updates through Patricia, respecting our request for no direct contact. Kyle remained in jail, and according to Dad's brief visit, remained angry and defiant. I followed up on all the regulatory complaints I'd filed. The IRS concluded their investigation and levied substantial back taxes against Kyle. He'd be paying them off for decades. Dad's contracting business remained closed, though he'd avoided personal bankruptcy through careful asset management. Mom's bar association issue had resolved favorably, though the stress had prompted her early retirement. None of it brought me satisfaction. The revenge I'd enacted wasn't sweet or rewarding. It was just necessary, a cauterization of a wound that might otherwise have festered indefinitely. 6 months after the charges were dismissed, Ethan got his license reinstated. We celebrated quietly, just the three of us, with his favorite dinner and a small cake. He drove us to the restaurant, careful and confident, and I watched him navigate traffic with the same maturity he'd shown throughout the entire ordeal. "You handled this better than most adults would have," I told him over dinner. "I had good examples," he replied simply. That night, lying in bed, Sarah turned to me. "Do you think we'll ever have a relationship with your parents again?" I honestly don't know. Part of me wants to believe people can change. Part of me thinks the damage is too fundamental. Ethan is starting to soften. He asked me yesterday if I thought his grandparents missed him. "What did you say?" "That I'm sure they do. That sometimes love isn't enough when trust is broken. That he'll know when and if he's ready to explore that relationship again." That was good. "I learned from you." She squeezed my hand. "You protected our son when no one else would. You stood up to your entire family. That takes courage." It didn't feel courageous. It felt necessary. That's what courage is. Doing what's necessary even when it's hard. A year after the accident, I received a letter from Kyle. It had been forwarded through Patricia, who'd screened it first to make sure it wasn't threatening. She gave me the option of reading it or destroying it unopened. I chose to read it. The letter was short, written in Kyle's barely legible scrawl. It wasn't an apology. Instead, it was a bitter screed about how I'd destroyed his life, ruined our family, and turned everyone against him over something that wasn't even that serious. He claimed he'd only lied because he panicked, that anyone would have done the same thing, that I was vindictive and cruel for pressing charges. The lack of self-awareness was staggering. Even after a year in jail, even after losing everything, Kyle still couldn't accept responsibility. He'd learned nothing. I put the letter in a file with all the other documents from the case and locked it away. Some people never change. Some bridges need to stay burned. But Dad's apology had been different. And in the months since, he'd demonstrated consistency. No more attempts at contact beyond brief updates. No pressure for reconciliation. Just quiet acceptance of consequences and respect for our boundaries. Maybe that was worth something. Maybe that was the beginning of real change. Ethan graduated high school with honors 2 years later. We held a small party, just close friends. My parents weren't invited, though they sent a card and a generous check for his college fund. The note inside was brief: "Congratulations. We're proud of you. Love, Grandma and Grandpa." Ethan held the card for a long time, then looked at me. "Can I respond?" "That's your choice. This is your relationship to manage however you see fit. I think I want to send them a thank you note. Not to forgive everything, but just to acknowledge they thought of me." "That's reasonable." He wrote a polite note, thanking them for the gift and acknowledging their congratulations. Nothing more, nothing less. It was civil without being warm, acknowledgement without invitation. A week later, a response arrived. Mom's handwriting, Dad's signature alongside hers. "Dear Ethan, thank you for your note. We understand that we have a long way to go to earn back your trust. We don't expect forgiveness, but we hope that someday you'll give us the chance to prove we've learned from our mistakes. We love you. We're sorry. And we're incredibly proud of the young man you've become. Love, Grandma and Grandpa." Ethan showed me the letter. "What do you think?" "I think it's sincere. I think they mean it. What you do with that is up to you. I'm not ready to see them. But maybe someday I'll want to talk to them. Is that okay?" "Of course. This is your choice, your timeline. Whatever you decide, I'll support you." 3 years after the accident, I ran into Dad at a grocery store. We both froze, then nodded awkwardly. He looked better than he had at my doorstep years ago. Less defeated, more settled. "James," he said quietly. "Dad. How are you? How's Ethan?" "We're good. He's in college, doing well." "That's wonderful. Really wonderful." He hesitated. "I know we're not supposed to have contact, but I want you to know that your mother and I think about you both every day. We're grateful for the updates through your lawyer. We're grateful Ethan sent that thank you note. He's deciding for himself what kind of relationship he wants with you. I'm staying out of it." "That's fair. More than fair." Dad paused. "Kyle got out 6 months ago. He moved across the country. We don't have much contact with him anymore. That's probably for the best." "It is. He never accepted responsibility. Never changed. Your mother and I finally realized we couldn't help someone who wouldn't help himself. That's growth. Too little, too late. But growth nonetheless." He shifted his grocery basket from one hand to the other. "I don't expect anything from you, James. I just want you to know that we understand what we did. We understand why you can't forgive us. And we accept that. Okay." We parted ways without further conversation. It wasn't reconciliation, but it wasn't hostile either. It was two people acknowledging a shared past and an uncertain future, respecting the boundaries that had been established. That evening, I told Ethan about the encounter. He listened thoughtfully, then asked the question I'd been avoiding. "Do you think you'll ever forgive them?" "I don't know. The anger has faded, but the caution remains. They proved they were willing to sacrifice you to protect Kyle. That's not something I can forget, even if I eventually forgive it." "But you don't hate them?" "No. I'm sad about what happened. Sad about what we lost. But hate requires energy I don't want to spend." "That makes sense." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "I think I want to have coffee with them. Just once, to see if they've really changed. Would that be okay?" The request surprised me, though it shouldn't have. Ethan was 20 years old now, old enough to make his own decisions about relationships. "You don't need my permission. If you want to see them, that's your choice." "I know. But I want your blessing." I thought about it carefully. "You have it. But be cautious. People can seem changed without being fundamentally different. If at any point you feel uncomfortable or pressured, you can leave." "I know. I'm not looking to rebuild the relationship we had. I just want to see for myself if the apologies were real." The coffee meeting happened 2 weeks later. I waited at home, anxious in a way I hadn't expected. When Ethan returned, he looked thoughtful but not upset. "How did it go?" Sarah asked. "It was okay. They've definitely changed. Grandpa especially. He's quieter, less quick to make excuses. Grandma cried a lot. They both said they were sorry, multiple times, and it felt genuine." "How do you feel?" "Complicated. I'm not ready to have them fully back in my life, but I don't think I need to shut them out completely either. Maybe we can have an occasional coffee, see how it goes." "That seems reasonable," I said. Over the next year, Ethan met with my parents every few months. Always in public, always brief, always on his terms. He shared limited details about his life and listened when they talked about theirs. It wasn't the close relationship they'd had before, but it was something. They never asked to see me. They respected the boundaries, understood that my forgiveness wasn't guaranteed just because Ethan had chosen limited contact. That restraint was itself evidence of growth. 4 years after the accident, Sarah and I attended a community event where my parents were also present. We saw them across the room, and this time, Mom approached tentatively. "James. Sarah. It's good to see you." "Hello, Patricia," Sarah said, her voice carefully neutral. Mom looked at me with eyes that held a familiar sadness. "Ethan mentioned he had coffee with you recently. He said you're doing well." "We are. I'm glad. I think about you both often. Wonder how you're doing, what your lives look like now." "We're managing." She nodded, accepting the distance. "I won't intrude. I just wanted to say hello and let you know we're here if you ever want to talk." After she walked away, Sarah took my hand. "You okay?" "Yeah. It's strange seeing them as regular people rather than the villains of the story. They were never villains. Just flawed people who made terrible choices. That's what makes it complicated. Looking back now, from 5 years' distance, I can see the whole situation with more clarity. My family made choices that fundamentally broke trust. I responded by ensuring they faced the consequences of those choices. Neither action was pleasant, but both were necessary. Kyle remains estranged from all of us. Last I heard, he was living somewhere in Nevada, working sporadically, still blaming everyone else for his problems. Some people never learn. Some patterns never break. My parents have worked to rebuild their lives. They live modestly now, volunteer regularly, and seem to have found peace and simplicity. Whether their change is permanent or circumstantial remains to be seen, but time is the only way to know for sure. Ethan maintains limited contact with them. He's kind but boundaried, loving but cautious. He's found a balance that works for him, and I respect his choice even when it's different from mine. As for me and Sarah, we've built a life that doesn't depend on external validation or family approval. We've learned that sometimes protection means building walls, that sometimes love means standing alone, that sometimes the hardest choices are the right ones. The car was eventually replaced. The legal bills were paid. The trauma has faded into something we can talk about without pain. But the lesson remains: family isn't just blood. It's behavior. It's choice. It's the daily decision to show up for each other when it matters most. My family failed that test. We passed it. And in the end, that's what I want Ethan to remember, not the betrayal, not the revenge, not the broken relationships. Just the simple truth that when everything was on the line, we chose him. We chose truth over convenience, justice over family politics, his future over our comfort. That's what family is supposed to do. Hope lives in choosing integrity when compromise seems easier. Love shows up not in grand gestures, but in the daily decision to prioritize what's right over what's convenient. Real change isn't measured in apologies, but in the patient, consistent work of becoming better, not for forgiveness, but because it's simply who we need to be. The deepest bonds aren't forged through blood alone, but through the quiet courage of standing for each other when the cost is highest and the path is hardest.